What if Kyle Larson went to Stewart-Haas Racing after 2020? It's an interesting question now that we've seen how the different paths have went. Larson becoming one of the elite drivers in NASCAR, a NASCAR champion who wins multiple races a year, and it's pretty odd for many to think of him in any other car but the 5. Even thinking of him in the 42 seems like a long time ago when, in fact, it was only 4 years ago. And for Stewart-Haas Racing, it seems like a terrible team for Larson at this point. It's a team that's shutting down. It had basically just continued to fall over the last 4 years that Larson ascended. So what happens if these two paths don't divert, if they actually meet together and are one path for a set amount of time? Well, I think it's an interesting question because I don't think it goes the places that many might think. Let's go back to 2020. Kyle Larson has been indefinitely suspended by NASCAR and let go early from Ganassi. In our timeline, Larson goes to HMS and the rest is history. He wins 10 races the first year in the championship and is probably the man to beat every year since then. But what if that wasn't the case? What if, say, Ford was open to bringing Kyle Larson in and didn't shut down Tony Stewart? Stewart somehow pries Larson away from Rick Hendrick and Hendrick Motorsports and leaves them with a vacancy that we'll talk about later. Well, let's get to it here. Tony Stewart signs Kyle Larson to drive the number 14 car in place for Clint Bowyer, who is retiring at the end of the 2020 season. Briscoe was ready for Cup, and I think he initially was going to be the choice for this, but I think they'll hold him off for one more year. Instead, having Custer stay in the 41 for now before the year after being replaced by Chase Briscoe, who was clearly the better driver and has the Mahindra money. With that, I don't think that very many sponsors are going to go to Kyle Larson after what happened, very similarly to what happened after 2020 in real life, just because he was damaged goods at this point. And I think that while some Stewart-Haas Racing stalwart contracts would be added in when it comes to sponsorship for him, he's going to have a lot of races in the 14 Haas car, whereas the 41 would end up being Mahindra down the line. But I think that with this, you have a lineup of Harvick, Almirola, Larson, and then Custer, before then bringing Briscoe on. This would shut out Priest long-term, I think, from Stewart-Haas Racing. These cars were definitely needed to be filled in by good drivers, and Priest, I think, was the backup plan for Tony Stewart when all things failed, and all things did fail. Stewart would be ecstatic, though, with Larson. I think for the time being, it would rejuvenate his love and interest in NASCAR. In 2021, I think that Stewart-Haas Racing doesn't just get one win with Eric Almirola. Larson has a solid season, 4 victories, and it looks like the right way to go about it. Remember that while this team has fallen off in the last couple years, after 2020, this team was coming off of a huge season with Kevin Harvick where he won 9 races. And while Harvick didn't replicate that success the next 3 years since, let's also remember he was an older driver and age could have been a factor in that as well. Just because Stewart-Haas Racing was not a good team at the end and currently is by no means a championship contending team does not mean that when it started to fall, it still wasn't a good team at the point that we're at. I think that this season would have Larson trying to make a deep run into the playoffs, maybe even a Final Four run. I don't see him winning, though, just because Stewart-Haas Racing was starting to fall off, but I do see a comparable season to one of his better years at Ganassi, which at that point would look like Larson is ascending even further. 2021 would be perfect, as I think he'd come back with a vengeance, and as we saw, he did so, but the equipment with Stewart-Haas still, even at its best, is nowhere near Hendrick Motorsports. Going into 2022 and 2023, I think that, well, like real life, Stewart-Haas starts getting its final wins. Kevin Harvick is falling off, and you can kind of see it by the results at the end of his career. With this, the difference being is that Larson takes the role as the SHR franchise driver. Harvick doesn't need to get a bunch of chiropractor appointments for his hurt back because he doesn't have to carry Stewart-Haas Racing on it at the end of his career. he can retire with more grace than being the focal point of many bad jokes. Larson isn't going to be setting the world on fire, though. I think he gets maybe 2 wins and a deep playoff push in 2022. He's, again, still a very solid driver and can elevate equipment. One of the few drivers that I actually think can elevate equipment in NASCAR today. And in 2023, I think that he'll have a lesser push into the playoffs and maybe get a win during the season. Having a winless Kyle Larson, even with Stewart-Haas Racing's faltering equipment, seems foreign to me. He's a driver in the prime of his career. He is one of the best raw talents NASCAR's ever had. I don't see it happening. But the other thing I don't see happening is him ever winning a championship with this team. Stewart-Haas Racing's overall performance and sponsorship woes, I don't think would be turned around from one driver who would not have a 10-win season to erase away all the controversy around him. I think that stigma would actually stick around Larson's reputation a bit longer had he went with Tony Stewart, somebody who is well-versed in the art of being in the middle of controversies, both on and off the track. And with that, I think Stewart still would end up putting attention towards NHRA and his wife. And I'd say most would judge him if he put attention on NASCAR over the relationship with his wife. And Gene Haas is still going to put everything towards F1. Let's not pretend that Larson making a different move is going to have a butterfly effect that makes F1 less of a boom in the US as it was. Many times in history in this sport, some things are just bound to happen. And one of these, I think, is SHR leaving NASCAR. The other is Kyle Larson landing at Hendrick Motorsports. Let's look at the Hendrick side for a moment, briefly here. In real life, JJ retired, and Larson would take over a rebranded 48 that would be the 5 car. In the alternate timeline, I think Erik Jones signs a 3-year deal with HMS and the 48 team with a 4th-year option. I think he's a safe driver. Sponsor Ally would not dislike having Jones. I think he fits the mold pretty well. And I think that he would perform better than Johnson. I think he could average a win a season. The problem is Elliott in the 9, Byron in the 24, and Bowman in the 88 would perform better. In this timeline, I don't see the 5 coming back because I think that rebrand in part was also because of Kyle Larson having that HendrickCars.com sponsorship. And if they bring him in 24, I think they can actually get a few more sponsors on, and you don't need to have that giant rebrand all put together. You might still have it, maybe have him in the 5 or have Bowman in the 5 or whatever it might be. But I don't see that being the case more or less. In 2024, I'd say Kyle Larson to Hendrick Motorsports, and more than likely the 48 would be an immediate contender and basically run like he is right now. I don't think he'd be doing the double. Maybe he'd do it in 25 or 26, as doing it in the first year is just asking too much. Larson would still not be seen as a top 3 elite driver going into this year, though, 10 years into his career, because he'd probably have 10 to 15 less wins, give or take, depending on how SHR backed him. I think that the butterfly effect of all of this would be very interesting in who would get those wins that Larson had, and on top of that, who would get the championship Larson has. But I want to know what you think. What do you think would have happened had Kyle Larson went over to Stewart-Haas Racing for 2021 and beyond? Does the team stick around? Does Larson perform well? Or does he just end up at Hendrick in the end and ultimately nothing really changes? Let me know down in the comments below. While you're at it, leave a like in this video, share this video, and subscribe to this channel for more great and fun NASCAR content. Thanks so much to all my channel members for your continued support, and be sure to watch NWP tonight on my channel with special guest Raw Gator. And until next time, have a good one.